So I have the great pleasure now to introduce the winners of the IVS Career Excellence Prize, the most ambitious prize at IVS. And as it happened last year, we had a very contentious race, and we had two head-to-head amazing candidates, like happened last year. Somehow it was a copy of what happened last year. Here we had Professor Noam Eliaz and Professor Milko van der Boom. And it's interesting, I was looking at the CVs before, and it's interesting, in both of you, you both started a department. So Noam, you started the material science, and I see that Milko started founding head of the molecular chemistry and material science. Somehow what I gather from this, because I would not gonna mention all the prizes because it would take too long here, but it's just, I see, Noam, your focus is material science, and not only the scientific aspect, but I see the entrepreneurship aspect. I saw that you are kind of, your technology went into a startup that is doing dental amalgam. So maybe some of us, unfortunately, have your material in our mouth. But so it's the practical, the entrepreneurship from the academia. And what I see from Milko is more the pure scientific and more chemistry oriented part of the science. So I'm extremely excited, extremely proud to be here to announce those two giants. Noam, if I want, maybe one thing we have in common, at least I can have a little piece with you, is that I also have an MBA in addition to a PhD, which is not a common thing. And I think this helps in terms of when I see what you have achieved on bringing entrepreneurship from the scientific side. I think that may have been a help in doing that in terms of the management and the startup part. So without stop hearing me, we have to hear them. Like my PhD advisor used to say, please razzle, dazzle, and impress us with your talk. Noam, please, 20 minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't allow me to show spoken. You need to close so I can share.
Here we go.
Okay, do you see?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm honored and humbled to have been elected jointly with Professor Milko van der Boom from the Weizmann Institute of Science as the winners of the 2021 IVS-IPSTA Research Excellence Award. I want to thank those who nominated me and the awards committee. In addition, I want to express my deepest gratitude to all of my graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, undergraduate students, and collaborators. Without their hard work, commitment, support, and friendship along the way, my achievements leading to this honor would not have been possible. An important research and development activity in my lab, which I'm not going to discuss today, has been electrochemically assisted deposition of calcium phosphate coatings for dental implants. We have gone all the way from fundamental study of the electrochemical reactions, optimizing the plating bath, in vitro and in vivo studies, and scale up of our coatings. I currently serve as chief scientist of an international company located in Budapest, Hungary, that coats some of its dental implants electrochemically with our biomimetic coatings. And these coatings have already been implanted in humans, and we are up to the CE mark. So what I am going to talk today, so the outline will be, I'll talk about a snapshot, and some of you have already heard most of this in ISRA electrochemistry. Standalone 3D electrochemical printing, meniscus confined electrodeposition that we have been developing, which was actually an idea initiated by Dr. Ehud Galun. We focused in the demonstration on electrodeposition of copper. Other functional metals and alloys that will be printed in the near future in our lab include pure aluminum and cobalt phosphorus amorphous alloy. To the same recipe for successful electrodeposition of these materials under potentially relevant conditions for printing should be developed. So this will be bullets 2 and 3 on this slide. And last, another activity in our group has been surface functionalization of metallic powders for additive manufacturing by traditional technologies, for instance, directed energy deposition, which I will also highlight in this presentation. I would like to thank Professor Eliezer Giladi, my mentor, collaborator, and good friend for 20 years of close interaction. I also acknowledge my postdoc and former graduate students. You see their photos and names here, the results of whom I will highlight today. and I also want to thank two of our main funding agencies. So first, I will highlight our development of a 3D electrochemical deposition system, which combines meniscus confined electrodeposition with atomic force microscope closed loop control. This scheme provides submicron resolution. Okay, so the meniscus confined electrodeposition process, also known as electrochemical fountain pen nanofabrication, is an electrodeposition process that relies on an electrolyte containing a deposition tool, typically in the form of a micropipette with a micron or submicron size dispensing tip. When the micropipette is brought, approaches vertically the vicinity of a surface of a conductive substrate, a meniscus is established between the tip and the surface. Electrical potential or current applied between a small conductive wire inside the pipette and the conductive substrate via the meniscus causes reduction of the reducible material on the surface confined by the meniscus. The dispensing micro nozzle is then moved away from the substrate at a calibrated speed that matches the metal deposition speed in order to keep meniscus formation between the nozzle and the deposition materials, allowing continuous fabrication. The majority of the substrate can be kept out of the solution and no masks or sacrificial layers are required. Using meniscus confined electrodeposition process, the ability to create straight and overhang pillars as well as precise electrical connections has been demonstrated. Here you can see a scheme of our demonstrator system, which consists of the micropipette printing system. So illustration of this system is given on the left, figure A. As a proof of concept, the system was constructed around an atomic force microscope. The relative humidity affects the wettability properties of the surfaces, as well as the evaporation rate of water from the liquid bridge, which both influence the quality of the printed item. Therefore, the atomic force microscope was positioned inside an acoustic chamber, which served as an environment chamber. The micropipettes, so for successful printing, the system should have high sensitivity to forces applied on the tip, fast response, and rigid structure. A hollow glass atomic force microscope tip connected to the bottom cantilever of a tuning fork and working in tapping mode with phase feedback was found to meet all operational requirements. Specially designed atomic force microscope tips with pipette orifice diameters of 1 micron, 400 nanometers, and 100 nanometers were used. The feedback control is shown in figure B, and this is the part that we actually patented. We employ the atomic force microscope closed loop control, which enables full automation and in situ growth control. 3 types of hollow tips were studied. Number 1, this is a beam-bound stick glued to a magnetic holder. Number 2, lateral tuning fork in which the pipette is attached to the tuning fork on its side. And number 3, this is normal tuning fork, NTF, in which the pipette is attached to the bottom cantilever of the tuning fork. The quartz crystal tuning fork provides resonance control, and I don't have time to show the difference in results that we obtained, but NTF gave us eventually the best results. Using this scheme, three-dimensional printing of high quality, fully dense, uniform, and exceptionally smooth freestanding straight and overhang pure polycrystalline copper pillars with diameters ranging from 1.5 micron to 250 nanometers, and an aspect ratio higher than 100 was demonstrated. The left figure shows the potential transient side view in B and top view in C of a freestanding straight copper pillar that was printed galvanostatically using an NTF feedback control and a 1 micrometer micropipette. The pillar is uniform, fully dense, and with almost no porosity visible, and exceptionally smooth. You should compare it to the surface finish of the substrate, which is in this case a pure copper foil polished down to 40 nanometers colloidal silica. These are important advantages of electrochemical 3D printing over conventional metal additive manufacturing technologies, such as powder bed fusion and directed energy deposition. The quality of the pillar is also higher than in most previous fabrications dealing with electrochemical microprinting with other control schemes. Figure D and E shows scanning electron microscope images of copper pillars printed from a micropipette with an orifice diameter of 400 nanometer The actual diameter of the printed pillar is always larger, around 500 nanometers in this case. Note that the pillars do not bend and that they have high aspect ratios. Figure F shows an SEM image of two copper pillars printed from a micropipette with an orifice diameter of 100 nanometer. Using such pipettes, aspect ratios higher than 100 were achieved. The high aspect ratio structure does not deflect or buckle under its own weight. Namely, the pillars are relatively stiff compared with their own weight. Because on small length scales, body forces are relatively ineffective in deforming structures compared to surface forces. Table 1 shows you the effect of the pipette size on the pillar diameter, the current density, and the average deposition rates. Note that the highest deposition rate of 300 nanometer per second in this case is already comparable to common deposition rates in industry. The bottom right image is just to show you some of the material characterization that we did. So we saw that there was no preferred orientation in the Z direction. We calculated yield strength of carbon of 370 to 537 megapascal, respectively, for 1.5 micron and 500 nanometers pillars. This is much higher than pure copper, the C at 11,000, or even previous copper with some micron grains. Next, I will show you two developments of recipes. So electrodeposition of aluminum and its alloys is of great interest in the aerospace, automobile, microelectronics, energy, recycle, and other industrial sectors, as well as for defense and potentially electrochemical printing applications. The interest in electrochemical printing of aluminum and its alloys stems, among others, from the challenges in 3D printing them by laser-based additive manufacturing technologies. The Faraday efficiency of deposition from aqueous solution of aluminum is essentially zero, and the necessary energy makes the process impractical. There are organic solvents that have larger potential window, which can be used for electrodeposition of aluminum, but organic solvents have high vapor pressure and are flammable. Ionic liquids are ionic materials that are liquid below 100 Celsius degrees and have extremely low or negative vapor pressure. The liquid behavior in this case is dominated by ionic interactions. So the system that we studied here was based on the H being cation and the Tafsi anion with aluminum chloride, 8 molar aluminum chloride as the aluminum precursor. To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that this system has been explored for the position of aluminum. I don't have time to get into the details. What was our rationale, or why we hope that it will give good results, as I hope I will convince you. So on the left, you see this cyclic voltammetry at 4 different strain rates. Electrodeposition or reduction of aluminum starts at about minus 1.1 volts versus quasi-reversible electrode, the platinum wire. The anodic peak A1 can be related to the oxidation potential of aluminum in the studied cell conditions. The broad window of anodic stripping may indicate that different aluminum complexes form, which is A2 peak at slow strain rates, leading to a change in the ratio of the different aluminum species as the potential is scanned in the positive direction. The reaction kinetics was evaluated based on the effect of the potential scan rates on the A1 anodic peak and C1 cathodic peak current densities. Figure B shows the peak current densities dependence on the square root of the scan rate. The plot seems to have 2 slopes. Hence, the current seems to be controlled not only by charge transfer, but also by mass transport, namely diffusion of the electroactive species. This coupled effect reflects a quasi-reversible reaction. The fact that the line in B does not intersect with the origin as expected from a simple diffusion control process indicates a contribution of a side reaction in the non-purified ionic liquid. It is well known that several aluminum chloride complexes may coexist in equilibrium in solution. Based on electrospray ionization, high-resolution mass spectroscopy, and literature survey, we concluded that the reactant responsible for electrodeposition of aluminum in our system is aluminum 2-chlor-7 minus. Next, we study the nucleation and growth mechanisms. So figure 8 presents the experimental chronoamperometric transients at various applied potentials, while figure B presents the normalized curves for two different applied potentials and the comparison to the Sharif-Kras models. From figure B, it is evident that the position of aluminum on nickel is characterized by instantaneous nucleation. Compared to the instantaneous nucleation model, the higher experimental normalized currents may result from parasitic currents as well as from the inhibition effect associated with free chlorine ions in the processes of reduction and the change of species and complexes in solution. Cyclic voltammetry, chronoamperometry, and the X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy all indicated in our study possible effects of a side reaction. The figure on the left side shows both top view A to C and cross-section D of aluminum coatings deposited under different potentials. Fairly dense and uniform crystalline coatings are evident. The grain size changes from several hundreds of nanometers at minus 1.3 volts down to several dozens nanometers at minus 1.5 volts. Image analysis of same cross-sections images gave the position range between 11 and 734 nanometer per minutes. Basically, EDS analysis showed that we get in some of the cases pure aluminum. The picture shows the macroscopic appearance of aluminum coatings on nickel and copper substrates. A grayish dense uniform coating with good surface coverage is evident in both cases. X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy indicated that indeed we get metallic aluminum. Several TEM samples, this was done in collaboration with Professor Louisa Meshi from Ben-Gurion University, were examined in order to assess the quality of the S-grown aluminum layers. We got typical selected area electrode diffraction for aluminum. The density, the dislocation density was also typical for aluminum. And I will skip this one. Currently, we are studying the ongoing project. It's the electrodeposition and not electroless plating of cobalt phosphorus coatings on copper. So here you can see, this slide shows that we have successfully deposited at room temperature cobalt phosphorus coatings based on top view and cross-section images, as well as EDS chemical analysis. The motivation for room temperature is obviously because we are targeting for electrochemical printing. This will make our life easier. Here you can see the macroscopic appearance and uniformity of the cobalt phosphorus coating on copper. The coating has excellent mechanical properties, as you can see here, high hardness, high Young's modulus of elasticity, and surprisingly low coefficient of friction. The coating could not be scratched from the substrate using diamond scalpel blade. In a standard adhesion test, the samples failed within the glue and neither cohesively within the coating nor adhesively between the coating and the substrate. TEM analysis of FIB prepared samples revealed uniform microstructures, EDS chemical composition as in SEM EDS, and the nanocrystalline structure or nanocrystals embedded in an amorphous matrix. And this is done in collaboration with Professor Amit Kohn from my department. Here you can see the amorphous alloy in a diffractogram at around 45 degrees. Differential scaling calorimetry revealed the peak at 283 Celsius, which does not reappear in the second cycle of heating. This indicates the crystallization temperature of the amorphous alloy. High temperature X-ray diffraction show that until 250 Celsius, everything is the same, and the interesting changes come only from 300 Celsius upwards. Another example with respect to functionalization of powders for printing. So we have been working on development of encapsulation, diffusion, and thermal barriers on powders for directed energy deposition with size distribution between 45 and 150 microns. We have been working on a powder that was synthesized especially for this study. This is not a commercially available powder, with a target composition of 8% aluminum, the rest being zinc. So first we worked on coarse powders with metallic coatings. So zinc-based powder is electrochemically active. It is likely to be oxidized when immersed in aqueous solutions and accompanied by the hydrogen evolution reaction in acidic solution. Given this phenomena, it is not surprising that we could find only few reports on electrolysis deposition on zinc and its alloys, none of them on powders. We take into account that in the future, when scaling up, we will employ significantly larger quantities of powder and thus might encounter serious hydrogen safety concerns, namely spontaneous ignition and explosion. So first, we propose the two-step process that allows the formation of a compact, uniform, and conformal metallic shell on zinc-based alloy microparticles without agglomeration. The process utilizes, for example, controlled galvanic displacement or cementation of nickel deposition in ethanol-based bath, followed by nickel phosphorus photocatalytic deposition in an alkaline aqueous solution. So, here we demonstrate some of these. I don't have too much time left, so I will run quickly. So here you can see some examples of both of the cross-section and top view, just to show you that indeed, and you can look on the left, B5 for instance, that we were able to form a good shell of nickel. You can see it also on the right side, microscope images. Then in terms of the effect of surface hydrophobicity, so you can see that we successfully converted the very hydrophilic zinc aluminum powder into a hydrophobic surface with a contact angle of around 141 degrees, which was one of our goals. And this is already, by the way, I forgot to mention that I already moved to alumina shell. So this is no longer metallic shell. And finally, just to show you thermal stability comparison. So on the left side, in A and B, you can see the powder before we applied the alumina shell. We could expose it to a thermal stability test of 600 Celsius 1 hour in air furnace. After we apply the alumina shell, you can see for the same batch of powder that you don't see any longer the agglomeration and sponge formation. So this I went quickly just to give you a snapshot of some of our activities with respect to additive manufacturing and electrochemical deposition, from standalone 3D printing to development of new recipes for future printing, to functionalization of powders for technologies other than electrochemical printing. So with this, I thank the IVS and the Awards Committee again, and thank you all for attending this talk.
Thank you, Noam. Beautiful talk. Let's see if there are a couple of questions in the audience.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ruben.
First of all, Noam, thank you for a very exciting talk. I was particularly interested about this meniscus confined deposition. And on one of your slides, you showed an array of copper posts on a substrate. What I'm curious about is, can this ever be practical? In other words, suppose you wanted to fill, I don't know, a silicon wafer, coat it with copper, and have an array of these kinds of posts. How much time would it take?
So good question, Ruben. Let me see whether I can share again quickly the screen. Okay, so do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so basically the idea is not to deposit. I mean, I don't see any advantage of using this if you just want to do like a layer, like a coating, uniform coating over the surface. This is not.
No, but what about an array of posts like that, but not just over 10 microns, but over 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches?
So this would depend on the motor of what we are using. As I said, the demonstrator we used AFM. However, now this is where you have piezo stages and others that can go for longer ranges and quite quickly. So this is feasible. I can tell you that we had a magnetron with Orbotech on this. One of the advantages, by the way, since you don't need to mask, you can also use it for repair. So one of the motivations could be local repair of microelectronics, for instance, okay? Or nano antennas and others. And then your question becomes a little bit less relevant, okay? But in terms of the deposition, you could still optimize because we didn't use any buff additives, for instance. We didn't use pulse plating. I mean, there are still ways to improve this. And obviously, if you don't need to go to the 100 nanometer micropipette, I mean, some companies told us, I mean, 5 microns, 10 microns micropipette orifice is good. Then obviously you will be able to deposit larger areas faster.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a quick question. Noam, thanks a lot for the talk. That again, on that first part of your talk, the meniscus shape and size must depend on the surface properties, also on the roughness, on the wettability. And do you have to tune it for each surface, or how is that taken care of?
So one of the advantages, you know, that there is one spin-off of ETA, the company that work with the double wall AFM, okay? So, I mean, we have, I mean, one of our advantages, we refer to it in the patent, compared to theirs, that we don't need to do pre-calibration for each one of them. This is one of the benefits that you have it. But of course, I didn't have time to get to details, but for instance, relative humidity is important. So for instance, we found that 60% relative humidity is probably around the optimum. Then of course, the thermodynamic properties of the surface and some other factors, impurities, all of them affect. So, but still, if you compare to the, I didn't have time to show you the comparisons. There are some very nice work from other groups in recent years, different forms that use different controls, and the quality that they were able to get is not as good. So at least in our case, I mean, we don't really need to do pre-calibration for each test, okay? And if you want more information, I will be more than happy even to, you are more than welcome to, you are invited to come to the lab and we can show you.
Okay. Noam, thank you again. Fascinating presentation, excellent research, well-deserved prize.
Thank you.
And now we have Milko. I presented before, but Milko, I'm not sure you were there before.
Okay.
So I want to share with you just from the IVS website. So Milko is a full professor at the Weizmann. Of course, we're talking about amazing age factor, number of publications, all this. The thing that caught my attention was the fact that he started the molecular chemistry and material science department at Weizmann, and also the fact that his presentation, I guess, would be more chemistry oriented than materials than we had with Noam. And I'm very curious to see this. So I don't want to take any more time, and I want just to hear what Milko has to say. So Milko, the floor is yours. Please impress us.
I will do my best. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. And I would like to start with thanking the organizing committee for bringing the community together again this year, and hopefully next time we will all meet together in person. I feel very honored to have received this award, and I'm also very honored to share it with Noam. So today I'm going to talk about our thin films, chemistry, and also crystals that we are preparing here at the Weizmann Institute. So I am not doing the science in the lab myself. This is of course being done by many of our students, our graduate students. I would like to single out here Dalia Friedman. With her I started the lab many years ago already. I want to also to thank Chiara. She's an Italian research associate. She's also many years working in our group, and she received a prestigious award from the Italian government, and she will soon return back to her home country, Italy, and she will start a position at the University of Rome. And of course, I have to acknowledge and thank Michal Lav, shown here on the right. I'm working together with Michal already for many years, and it's always fun and pleasure to discuss science with her, and also learning from Michal. Now, these students are, it's a pleasure to work with them. They're bright, they're young, they're motivated, but they would not be successful without these scientists, these experts, our staff scientists that we are working with at the Weizmann Institute. They are driving the science. They're looking always for the best possible methods to do the analysis of our materials. They work closely with us and always search for new equipment, new state-of-the-art instrumentation. And we are very fortunate to work with them. And without them, we couldn't do our science. So regarding the science, so yeah, we work with molecules and we work with materials. So first I will talk a little bit about our electrochromic coatings, materials that change color by applying a voltage. I'm going to talk about coordination chemistry in our metalloorganic crystals, how we make them, and we try to understand the formation of those materials. And if I have still time, I will talk a little bit about our thin film chemistry based on weak interactions, based on halogen bonding. So we are really driven by what is the relationship between the material's properties, material structure, based on any given molecular structure. And this relationship is difficult. It's difficult to predict the material's properties for certain molecules. So we're trying to figure out the rules, and we have a lot of fun on the way. So let me first talk about our electrochromic coatings. So we really try to understand how to form thin films and how can we control the properties and structure based on the molecules that we're using. So we used a lot dip coating, more nowadays spin coating, and also spray coating to make these films. With dip coating, we make thin films of about 30 nanometers thickness. Spin coating, spray coating gives us thicker films of 200-300 nanometers thick. They're more porous than the dip coated films. I will show you some results now with that films that we made the spin coating and the spray coating. So the molecules that we're using, shown here on the right, are basically polypyridyl complexes. They have beautiful colors, and the color is very much dependent on the central metal cation. It can be iron, ruthenium, cobalt. So the stability is very high thermally and photochemically. Those materials are redox active, so you can easily switch the, let's say, the metal oxidation state many times. You can go from iron 2 to iron 3 and back, for instance. And by doing so, you change immediately the color of the material. So the color can be tuned by the metal cation, but also by the ligand structure. You can have 3 of these pyridine arms or 6 of them. And these pyridine groups, these terminal pyridine groups, we have them in order to bind to metal salts like palladium dichloride to form dense networks on the surface. So here's an example how we make the films. So we take, let's say, palladium dichloride salt. We deposit it on a TCO, transparent conducting oxide. Can be ITO, FTO. Then we spin coat on top of that one of our molecules, wash the films, and repeat these deposition cycles. So the intensity of the films, the colorations, is deepening with the number of course of the deposition cycles. We can also just mix the complexes together, and we can generate a variation of a diversity of different colors by doing so. We have characterized these films with many methods, but just to give an example here, we have here a piece of glass. On top of it, we have a metal oxide, FTO, our thin film, and some platinum to protect the film, where we we slice the film, and we see here the metal oxide. The black area is our film. It's about 280 nanometers thick. And you can see really that there is no defects and no cracks. You have really a nice homogeneous coating of your metal oxide. Other methods that we're using is shown here. We do spray coating. We work actually in the Technion. They have an automated spray coater. So also there we use palladium dichloride in our metal complexes. It's a fully automated process. So after about 40 minutes reaction time, you have your surface very homogeneously coated with our materials. And the color is dependent on which metal cation you're using. This is based on iron. This is based on, this is all based on iron, but this depends, the color is dependent here on the metal structure, the liquid structure that you have, 3 or 6 of those arms. Then we put these films into kind of solid state devices. So this is in layered architectures. So you have your metal oxide, you have your electrochromic material, you have an electrolyte and a storage layer and a top electrode. And I will show you now some results, how you can switch actually the colors of these materials. So we take certain film in an electrolyte solution, You see here very nicely when we oxidize the metal centers. On the left, it's iron, and the right is ruthenium. You see very nicely the films become transparent. When we reduce the films, when we reduce the metal complexes, it returns to the ground state. And we can do that many times. The switching time can be much faster than will be difficult to see by eye, but the time is also dependent on the diffusion of the electrolyte through the film. The films, if you want to apply them one day, they have to have high stability. And here we see the stability experiments that we have performed. Here's just a simple CV of a film that contains iron. So you oxidize the iron, you reduce it, and a postdoc, Svijit, has shown that you can do that more than 100,000 times. Thermal stability of the films is also quite impressive. This is UV spectrum of such a film. You have the metal to lichen charge transparent band here that causes the coloration of the film. So heating the film for 70 degrees in air for 150 days, we don't see any changes in the optical properties of these films. Why 150 days? Because after 150 days, the paper got published and we moved on to another project. But the films are quite robust. Here are another few examples of films that have been prepared in our laboratory. You see here samples of films on ITO or on flexible substrates, metal oxide, ITO and PET. You can bend those films, and you can do that many times. The film is not affected by the bending. However, after several bending cycles, the ITO, the metal oxide, actually started to degrade. And here you see an example of such a bended film being switched in an electrochemical cell. The surfaces that you're using, you can pattern them, you can take out ITO, or you can add ITO, whatever you want. But you can see when you then put your electrochromic film on those patterned surfaces. You see here very nicely here an example of the Weizmann science appearing. Here's an example of another device that we made, a solid state device. See how homogeneous the surface is. When you oxidize the film at low potential, 2.8 volt, the film becomes transparent and you can reduce it back to the starting point. What is unique about these materials is that they are dark. They are very non-transparent in the ground state, and they become only transparent when you apply a voltage. Many materials like electrochromic polymers, organic polymers, they are non-colored in the ground state and become colored when you apply a voltage. Also, the dark state is often a problem in this field, but in these films, as you can see here, the films that we have, we can make them completely dark, so you cannot see through them. What I've shown so far are films that change the color from actually transparent to a colored state. But of course, what we can do, we can also make different composites on the surface. We can, for instance, first spin coat a layer of ruthenium complexes on the surface, and then a layer of iron complexes on the surface. And by doing so, you generate a film that has different states. You can oxidize the whole structure. So you go from this color to this one. Everything is oxidized now. It's now transparent. And now we can reduce selectively only the ruthenium, and the iron stays in this higher oxidation state. The charge actually is essentially trapped in the iron layer. Then you can reduce the ruthenium complexes further to ruthenium 1. You open a channel for electron transport to allow, and you can reduce the iron back to its ground state. So by combining cleverly those materials, those films, you can generate multi-state electrochromic systems. So now we are here. Where are we going to? Well, the complexes and the ligand synthesis we have developed that for many years in our lab. The ligand can be synthesized in more than 30 gram scale. And the assemblies, we have developed several methodologies to coat different kind of materials. The device engineering in general in this field is still a big issue. And there are problems with electrolytes, with the stability of the electrolytes. Also, how can you scale it up? How can you make coatings on large scale areas if you want to go to smart windows? That is the direction that this field should go, and we're working on it also very actively. So we also work on a lot of on crystals. We use also coordination chemistry. We make metalloorganic frameworks. People are studying metalloorganic frameworks mainly for carbon capture and energy storage. What people do and what we do, you take metal ions and organic ligands, you get a coordinated bond, you get a 3D network, and it's basically crystalline porous material. Those materials often look like are shown here. The uniformity is people don't care too much about it, but it is also, it's not just uniform. And we are very interested in these materials because there are a lot of things to be learned here. How can you make uniform crystals? What is the relationship between the crystallographic structure and the morphology of those materials? So we're working actively on these materials for already several years. And we designed a ligand system, again, based on pyridine groups for coordination to a wide range of metal salts. And of course, this is a very versatile system. You can change the core, you can change the bond order, the length of those arms. And we thought we had the idea that at high temperatures, this coordination bond of the pyridine unit to this metal should be reversible. So eventually the system finds itself in a thermodynamically stable state, and it might be a uniform one. And that is exactly what is happening. Because when you take copper dibromide in such a ligand, this is the only product that you form, a very uniform crystallographic system. These are all very small crystals. It's the only product that you get, and it's very uniform. That is a really unique system. But this is not the only example that we have. We have many of them. This is another system. We modified the ligand a little bit with a nickel dichloride, and the only product that we get are those bricks. These brick-type structures. It's a crystalline material. No other products are being formed. Yield is quantitative. It's only one kind of morphology. So over the years, we generated quite a number of structures. Here I show only a few of them, the kind of weird kind of structures. You can see here a 3D Star of David and kind of, yeah, undefined but beautiful structures shown here. We have Chiara's flowers. These have actually have a hidden chirality built into the morphology. That you can see that by micro-CT measurements. We have the dinosaur eggs of Vivek. You see here crystals that have a kind of multi-domain appearance. And we have another structure that is hollow. And you have actually 6 rods connected with each other. So these are all single crystals, although they don't appear like that. The uniformity of these systems is also very high, quite unique. Just want to go into details for one example. Here are some results of Vivek. He takes this ligand with nickel nitride in a solvent of DMF and chloroform to dissolve these ligands, not very soluble. You put it in a pressure tube, you heat it up for a few days, and this is what you get, very uniform crystals with this weird surface texture. Sidney Cohen did a lot of AFM work on these surfaces, but also Lothar Hauben did a lot of electron diffraction measurements on this, and also Linda Simon worked on that. And we came to the conclusion that it's indeed a single crystal and not something kind of weird polycrystalline material. So when you have such a system, you try to beat the hell out of it. You try to figure out what is going on. You try to see what will happen if you change, for instance, the metal salt to ligand ratio. You try to change concentrations and so on. Whatever we throw at this system, the uniformity remains very high, as shown here to the right. You see the beautiful structures here with a high level of uniformity. When we change the metal salt to ligand ratio, we have only here in a 2-to-1 ratio, we see this weird crystals with this strange morphology. And also when we have here, we change the supersaturation. You see the surface texture is changing, but the uniformity is very high. Also, we see here that the size of the crystals are changing a lot. We believe that the metal salt and also the ligand act like a kind of modulator. They control the growth of the crystals. The metal salt can basically coordinate to the surface of the crystals and slow down or speed up their growth. So yeah, it is an interesting system. It's also interesting to see that the crystallographic structure of all these crystals are actually identical. It's the same system. The metal to ligand ratio in each of these crystals is 1-to-1, regardless of the starting ratio that you're using. Just want to show another example. People talk a lot in crystallizations about impurities. And here is an example that we take this ligand with nickel dibromide in a solution, heat it up for a few days, and we get beautiful barrel-shaped crystals, very uniform. But what will happen now if we sonicate the starting solvents for a long time? What you do, you generate radicals, traces of radicals in the solutions. The solvent starts to decompose, basically. We see that by EPR measurements. When we add the ligand and the metal salt to the solutions after sonication, we see the following happening. You see completely different crystals. You see these hollow crystals having these 6 rods connected. If you're like kind of 3 growth zones, 3 growth areas, just by sonication of the solvents for about an hour prior to carrying out the reaction. So to prove actually that these systems are really hollow, we did some extensive micro CT studies with flat Bromsfeld, and you can really see through the crystals, and the crystal is hollow throughout. We also slice the crystals using FIB-SAM, and also from there we can learn that these crystals are all the way hollow. We followed the formation of these systems. Here are some time-dependent electron microscope studies. So we stop the reactions after given time periods. And you see, doesn't matter if it's 1 hour and a half, 1 day, 2 days, it's a uniform system of beautiful crystals. But at the short reaction times, the crystals seems to be solid. You see at the edges some kind of structure. And in time, you see the crystals actually seems to dissolve. The crystals don't change much in the length, but the thickness actually is increasing. So we believe that it's in a kind of inside-out oswald ripening process. You have here a genetically formed system that is not very stable and starts to dissolve, and the material that is being dissolved is being added to the outside of these crystals. How do they look from inside? The crystals I've shown so far, and we have many more of them with all these strange morphologies. I show here 3 of them only. They have all similar crystallographic packings, and the crystal structures are very unique by itself. The crystals consist of 2 types of channels. The diameters of the channels are about 1 nanometer. The inner walls of the channels are chiral, and inside one crystal you have the same chirality. So you have a racemic mixture of crystals, but each crystal by itself has its own chirality. And it's interesting to see that we start with achiral molecules. We use no chiral components to get chiral crystal structures. The crystals we believe that origin of the crystals, the chirality in the crystals is the coordination chemistry of the ligands to the metal center. The green dot here is nickel, and you have here 4 pyridine units from 4 different ligands coordinating to the metal center in a kind of propeller type arrangement. So you have a kind of chiral arrangement around the metal centers, and each metal centers have the same chirality in one crystal. So I think that after a few years of work, we have a good idea how we can generate crystals which have a very uniform morphology. We have a good idea how to predict the crystal structure based on the ligands that we're using, and mainly the first row metal salts that we're using. The morphology, to predict that is still for us an open question. It's a big question also how the structure, the crystallographic packing relates to the morphology of the crystals, and then that's an open question for us that we want to address in the future. And the last topic I want to show a few more slides is about halogen bonding based films. So far I've shown that we use metal ligand coordination chemistry to generate coatings, to generate crystals. There are many more forces that you can use as a chemist to create materials. We are using also halogen bonding. It's an interaction, maybe you can compare it to in strength to hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding is not directional, halogen bonding is more directional. So you can take again ligands that have pyridine groups shown here, and they can coordinate to, let's say, aryl iodine groups. So it's a weak interaction, but if you have many of them in the material, you can create quite robust materials. So what we did is the following. By vapor phase deposition, we generated films for these kind of molecules. These films are amorphous. And then in a closed cell, we expose these amorphous films to these kind of molecules at 60 degrees Celsius, and we follow these reactions. And these nitrogen groups can interact with these iodine groups. And what we see in time on the polarized light, first nothing, because you start with basically an amorphous film. And you see here these Maltese kind of crosses appearing, indicating the formation of crystalline material. When we look at the Raman spectroscopy during the measurements in a cell that was developed in the lab of Ido Pinkas in the Weizmann Institute, we see actually if you look at this intensity and frequency of this carbon iodine bond, you see the Raman intensity is changing, and you see a shift actually, indicating that you weaken this bond because of this interaction that is happening. So you can follow this. If you look at the film surface of the first amorphous film that become crystalline, you see the following happening in time. This is about 60 degrees Celsius, and you see at this moment, you should see the spherulites appearing. The film starts to become actually co-crystalline. So you can also see the spherulites here, and you can cut those films, and you can see here a side view. When the amorphous film basically is continuous, when you look at the spherulites, you see here the material, here is a gap, here's the material, here's a gap. And we know that these films are crystalline from powder X-ray diffraction measurements, but also from micro-ED. You can see here nicely the diffraction patterns when we measure those films. So these are 3 examples I wanted to show here. In the last example of our thin film chemistry, we didn't build in functionality here. That will be here our next challenge. We have a tool now, a new method to create crystalline films. And now the next step is, can we make them, can we add some properties to those films which can be interesting, maybe for electrochromic coating or for non-linear optical properties. So to this end, I would like to thank our resources of funding. And of course, funding is never enough. However, I think in Israel, we are still very fortunate to have funding agencies like the ISF and the BSF, who gives us a lot of freedom to dream and to think about all kind of fundamental experiments we want to do, and they give us funding for that. So I'm really appreciative for these funding agencies. Thank you for your attention and being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Milko. Beautiful talk. Time for a couple of questions. In fact, if nobody has a question, I have a question for you, because when I saw your structures that evolved with the porosity inside, the first thought that came to mind, but it doesn't match your chemistry to me, is a Kirkendall effect.
Okay.
What do you think?
Which structures are you talking about?
The ones where you showed the 6 bamboo things with the hole inside.
Okay. No, we didn't think about
because
that.
there are techniques to do the whole nanotubes when you have 2 materials where the inside diffuses faster on to the outside than vice versa.
Okay.
But in this case, you have one phase, right?
Right.
So that was the thought that came to mind, but it didn't match your material.
No, actually, we're looking also for applications for the materials. We can functionalize these materials with chromophores and have beautiful optical properties. And we don't want to go in the direction of, let's say, gas absorption. But if any of you has some interesting ideas and want to use some of our materials, I will be happy to hear from you.
Okay. Noam, you had a question?
No, I just felt Milko.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are there questions? No more questions for Milko? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I want just to thank both Milko and Noam. Amazing presentation, super well-deserved prize. Toda rabah. We're all happy and all enthused by what we saw and heard so far. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Toda.